explain to the listeners who might not know what is ADHD.
When you look at a 12, 13, 14-year-old, what happens when you're told you have ADHD? It's like, oh my god, I have a disorder.
We're gonna cover, tools and best practices in terms of overcoming these problems, these hindrances that people might suffer from.
You externalize accountability, you externalize reminders, and that sort of helps a lot.
That's a good question, man. I'm a little stumped. Welcome to Man on a Mission. My next guest, Ankita Dadachanji, is an accredited ICF Life and Youth Leadership Coach and India's second ever certified ADHD coach. Ankita, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Anas.
Thank you for coming. Before we get started, let me continue with your intro. So Ankita serves as a consultant for gender sensitization, diversity and inclusion, and the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace, other than her work as a ADHD coach and a youth leadership coach. And in her coaching engagements, Ankita works with both individuals and corporate clients across management levels, from founders all the way to entry-level executives. Her clients include Raymond, Bombay International School, and the Lighthouse Project. Did I cover that?
Yeah, you did.
It's good.
Thanks.
That's an impressive introduction.
You delivered it well. That's what matters.
Good. I'm glad. All right, let's get started, shall we?
Go for it.
Are you nervous still? Or are you starting to ease up a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll loosen up as it goes on. All right, so let's begin with, obviously, why we're here today, ADHD. You are the resident expert, and something that's very close to my heart, because as you and I have talked about, I've suffered with ADHD, overcome it, thankfully. My head of production, Abrar, who is behind the camera, also, suffers from it. But so it's something that's very close to our hearts. So, we were very excited to have you here, have you come shed some light on it, and, hopefully by the end of what I think will be a very productive hour and a half, we all, learn a thing or two. So first question, just off the bat, explain to the listeners who might not know, what is ADHD?
Okay, so ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a disorder which talks about essentially three things. One is somebody who's extremely hyperactive, right? Then there's another thing called inattention. That's number two. And the third is a combination of both. So if you are diagnosed with ADHD, and I always say this, please get diagnosed, don't self-diagnose, because it's a genetic disorder. It's not that one fine day you wake up and you're 25 and you say, hey, today I have ADHD. No. It kind of shows up from your childhood. It could get aggravated as you grow older if you've not managed it or realized that you have it. Or again, diagnosed yourself through an expert. So it's basically these three aspects. You're inattentive, you're hyperactive, or you could be both.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking about diagnoses. This is something that just popped into my head. Do you think that the world we live in today, because there is now, in the social media age, a little more awareness of ADHD. Do you think people are skewing towards now being overdiagnosed? Because I feel like everybody I talk to, tends to be like, yeah, I have ADHD, I have, I struggle with paying attention to things, or, short attention span. So how does someone recognize, okay, do I have ADHD, or am I just, lacking discipline?
Fab question. And I think this is something I talk about with every client of mine who comes in and says, hey, listen, I have ADHD, and I ask them, do you have a diagnosis? And they say, no, but I have read so many things. Okay, so why don't you tell me what happens? You said you've been diagnosed with ADHD, right? How is your life different from, say, a friend of yours who was neurotypical?
I love how this has now gone from a podcast to a session. Good. I'm getting a free session out of this. So how has it affected me personally? The hyperactivity was a big thing. I definitely struggled to, sit in one place for an extended period of time. I had, for me, it was kind of a juxtaposition between not being able to focus on one thing, but also having, hyper focus, but only when I felt stimulated. which for me, either was football or, very few subjects like history, history buff. So something like that, where I was interested, had no problem. But, like, we live in a world where you have to focus on things that you aren't innately passionate about. So for me, it was those two things. Also, impulse control was a big one for me, where, I think I was a little short tempered. I've worked on that, thank God.
I don't need to cover myself then.
Except for when I'm playing football. Rehan will tell you about that. But so it was, those three things really were the big ones. But it wasn't until later on, I think I was like 10 or 12, when even my mom decided to be like, like, this ADHD is a real thing. So maybe you should get tested. And that's when I knew. So fairly, later on in my life.
Amazing. Now, do you think it affected a big part of your life at that point?
I mean, I struggled academically. So definitely it had to have, like, I'm not attributing it completely to it, but I'm sure it had, some effect on, I think maybe if I had the right resources earlier, it could have, mitigated some of the effects of it. But that's a good question, man. I'm a little stumped.
So, ADHD is a genetic disorder. It's like I said before, it's not that you wake up one fine day and you say, hey, I have ADHD. Right? When you're younger, there's a lot of support. Simply put, somebody is there to take your uniform out, iron it, keep it ready for you. There's someone there to remind you, hey, Anas, pack your bag. Tomorrow you have these classes. You don't need to think about it, right? You need to focus on your studying. Now, despite not having to focus on multiple things, focusing just on one aspect of your life, you're still having trouble, which means there is something which is interfering in your daily life, which is making it hard for you. Then you get diagnosed. Yes, it is, that's what I would say. ADHD, it's not that everybody has ADHD. Today, because our attention spans are reducing, we need to see how much of it is affecting our daily lives. If it's not interfering with your daily life, if it's not interfering with your productivity, your work, as an adult, let me say, if it's not interfering with your productivity, work, with your relationships, with your partner, with your friends, with your family, in any way, then you're okay. We all, right now, with the social media, digital world that we're in, of course, our attention spans are reducing. We know that. If it's not interfering in an everyday basis and your life is not getting disrupted to a different level, then you don't have ADHD.
You spoke about social media, and I want to get to that. But before that, I want to backtrack because you said something very interesting. ADHD is hereditary, right? So, for people who might not know what that means, you inherit that from your parents, grandparents, whatever that may be. And then researching for our pod, there was a paper I came across by Farone et al, I think.
Absolutely.
What's the et al, by the way? Is that just like additional and etc.
Yeah.
So there was a study by Farone et al that spoke about, like, it confirmed that ADHD, yes, it is hereditary. But can you talk about what exactly that means in terms of, like, what does it mean to inherit something like that?
Okay. So, when you have ADHD, there is sort of a chemical imbalance in your brain. So your dopamine levels are lower than what they should be. Yeah, dopamine is what gives you a hit to motivate yourself, to be able to plan better. So if I have to just simply put it, a neurotypical will have their neurotransmitters 1 and 2 connect, 3 and 4 connect, 5 and 6 connect. This is just to kind
of rule of thumb,
help you understand in a very basic layman way. But somebody who has ADHD has dopamine deficit, so their neurotransmitters don't connect in a systematic way, right? A might connect to C and D might connect to F, right? 1 might connect to 3 and 5 might connect to 6. So their structure is missing. So basically, it's a disorder where there is a deficit in dopamine levels in your brain.
And I also came across a lot of literature that spoke about the executive functioning of the brain.
Absolutely.
So how does that, disconnect affect the executive functioning of the brain?
Okay, so there are various parts of the brain. Okay, I won't go into each part of it, it will become a biology class otherwise. But so Russell Barkley, who's an American neuropsychologist, he came up with this study of what, when, why, and how circuit. Okay, these are all circuits. The what circuit is the part of your brain which helps you really think of, basically connect your thoughts to everything that you do. It's what you're doing, right? The when circuit is when do you do things that you remember to do. The why circuit, should I go slower?
No, what, when, yeah, we've covered both, yeah.
Why is essentially like, why am I doing it? What is the motivation behind doing it? And then it's how. Once I've done the thing, how do I feel about it? If I feel good, I probably will start building interest, like maybe history for you, right? You read it, you enjoyed it, and hey, fantastic, you went back to it. But how is the experience? That's what the how talks about. Once you're done with doing, kind of engaging in a task, how do you feel internally and externally? Right? So these are basically our executive functions. For example, our thoughts, our motivation, our planning, organizing. When circuit talks about time management, which is a big part, right? So a neurotypical will think of structure. They'll say, hey, I need to come to this podcast at 6 p.m. So how do I plan the rest of my day, right? I need to leave. In order to come reach here at 6, I live 1 hour away. I could potentially get traffic. So I leave at 4:45, let's say. Yeah, a neurodivergent will be like, okay, I need to be here at 6. I take 30 minutes to reach. You're not really thinking of the details. Or, okay, I'll take 1 hour to reach. You're not going to think beyond that, right? So what are your restrictions? So your executive functions mainly talk about basic skills that you need in your day-to-day life. How much of them have a deficit? And that's where ADHD comes in.
And we're gonna cover, tools and best practices in terms of overcoming these problems, these hindrances that people might suffer from. But before we do that, let's talk about the difference and the correlation of ADHD with sex. Because if I'm not mistaken, boys and men are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls are.
Yeah.
So how does that kind of play out, with ADHD and the sexes?
So that's correct. So men or boys are usually tested 3 times more than girls, right? Now, what tends to happen is guys show a lot of hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms, which is why they're diagnosed. When they're in school, the teachers will be like, okay, maybe they have these challenges because they're hyperactive. Now, let's come to girls. This is a research again that's been done, which talks about girls have more of the inattention type. And I have recently been diagnosed, and I really, when I read this study, I kind of really connected with it, because it said that girls have more the inattention type, which means when they're in school, they're not hyperactive. They are quiet. And that quietness or the inattentiveness is taken as, oh, they're very shy. Right? So, go ahead.
It's funny that you say that, because just yesterday, I was talking about this script with my mom. And she said the exact same thing. She works, she works with a meet, so she's in this space, the mental health space. But like exactly the words that you're saying is what she said to me, like what, 24 hours ago.
Oh,
but yeah,
wow.
It's uncanny. But please continue. But you were talking about how boys tend to suffer from ADHD.
Yeah.
And that's why, because those symptoms are more
of hyperactivity.
Yeah, those hyper, and they're more out there, they're more explicit, easier to diagnose.
Correct.
Girls, from what I understand, it's more ADD. So is that the difference, or explain it to me? You're the expert.
Okay, so what happens is ADD was a term which was used a couple of decades ago. Okay, now ADD is attention deficit disorder, and ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What happened over time, they realized that ADHD now is a combination of the two things, right? Hyperactivity and inattention. So they've sort of evolved after a lot of research from ADD to ADHD. And yes, to answer your question, ADD is attention deficit disorder. Yes, girls do tend to show more symptoms of ADD in the at a younger age. Yeah.
And you said that guys are, 3 times more likely to be even tested for it. And I think that's,
Yeah.
That's telling about, about the culture around it and kind of like the way this, I don't want to call it an issue, but like, what do you even call it? Like, for example, if someone has ADHD, they don't have okay, maybe they do have an issue, but what's the right vernacular?
I mean, honestly, it's like it's something that they have to manage. They have a challenge.
It is a challenge.
It's a roadblock or a challenge that you work on. So we always say you can't. You'll never get cured of ADHD. You have to manage your ADHD. If you manage it, you can manage it fantastically in a way that it doesn't come in your way. But if you don't manage it and do nothing about it, well, it's not going to you won't know what to do when it shows up.
And if you are struggling to manage it, just hit up Ankita. She'll help you. She'll help you with that. All right. So boys are more likely to be boys are more likely to suffer from the hyperactivity. Can you comment on the role that testosterone plays in that? Is that something that does that have an effect on the hyperactive nature of boys versus the more inattentive nature of girls that are diagnosed with it?
It's different for both. I'm not going to comment on this. I think it's best if a psychiatrist talks about this, because they will have the right information.
Fair enough. I respect that. I respect that. All right. And what about other environmental factors that, in early childhood or, in your teenage years, that maybe they don't cause ADHD because, like you said, it's hereditary, but that make it worse or help mitigate the symptoms?
So environmental factors are very play a really big role. And what happens is, if you have ADHD or you've been diagnosed with it, and you've got a structure in place. For example, you have a routine that you're following to the T. You have discipline. Your parents are trying to make these uninteresting subjects really interesting for you. Well, yes, and that's the environment, right? That's helping you cope with it. For example, again, let's look at adults, because I work mainly with adults. Using calendars is very important. So if an adult comes to me and says, hey, I'm not being able to manage my time and I'm not able to organize myself because it is a challenge with ADHD, what are you doing to bring in structure? Do you have a routine? Do you plan everything? For example, do you also plan your breaks? So what you do in your daily routine really helps in order to work or manage your ADHD. Let me give you another example. I was reading this actually. So basically in 92, there was this American study which found that there were these Vietnamese refugees who settled in the US, and they did really well in school just because their parents made their studying very interesting. And they made sure that every single day they did this group work together. As a group, all these refugees kids were sitting and they would do their homework, etc. And they realized this was the environment that they were building. They realized that a lot of them, despite having ADHD, were able to manage it so well, and their deficits were not that low in the executive functions were not that weak, because it created that environment for them.
So the environment does have, comes back to the age-old debate in in psychology, nature, nurture.
Yeah.
So the nurture aspect does have a significant influence on how people deal with or can cope with ADHD.
Deal with and cope with, yes. Do they get ADHD because of the environment? No. Right? So like, for example, social media. Let's look at that. Does social media cause ADHD? No, it can't. It's genetic. Right? But does it make things more troublesome or difficult? Maybe yes. So for example, if you're constantly scrolling on your phone, a lot of people are on just scrolling through reels aimlessly in the night before sleeping, which means your sleep gets you sleep much later than you should be, because the screen light, as you know, is not very helpful if you want to go off to sleep. Sleeping late, not getting enough sleep, makes ADHD worse. So it's not the social media is not the cause of getting ADHD, but yes, making it worse. And that's an environmental factor.
Yeah, that's
right?
something that I came across in my research. The Bohr et al. Study spoke about it, how if someone does have ADHD, chronic social media use can worsen symptoms. But and this is a little just intuitively
Yeah.
speaking, the way I see it, we live in a world where people are now way more likely to consume short form content than they
Yeah.
are long form content. Just algorithms, are built in that way to promote 30-second clips and a minute long clips, and it's all of us.
Sure.
So yes, obviously the literature is there in terms of ADHD getting worse by extreme social media use. But what about with someone that doesn't have ADHD? I feel like the social media use has to affect them negatively as well. Like, what do you think about that?
So again, there's no research done, but this is what I think personally, right? That we have executive functions like planning, organizing, time management. I'm just naming a few of these repeatedly because these are very common and easy to understand. Now what happens is, if you're scrolling, you're not conscious of your time. So yes, there is a executive function deficit. You're not making yourself better at managing your time. You're actually being counterproductive. So yes, it does affect your life, but it doesn't mean you have ADHD.
And it doesn't make you ADHD.
It doesn't,
because it's not there to begin with in the first
Correct,
place.
Correct.
Although I do worry for, see, by the time social media came around, and I'm 26 years old. I'm a little I think social media came around when I was about, say, 15, around that time. That's when it really started getting big. So I still had, a childhood without it. You still had a childhood without it.
No, we're different generations, by the way, totally.
But you did have a childhood without social media,
Absolutely.
and I did to some extent, at least
Yeah.
till my teenage years. But I'm sure you have cousins as well, nieces, nephews that just grow up around that. And I wonder, because obviously it isn't possible to do long-term longitudinal studies on children because they're not, adults yet, they're not fully developed. But I wonder what growing up in, this Instagram, TikTok environment is doing to their brains.
Are you asking me from an ADHD lens, or are you generally asking me?
I mean, I think it's more of a general question, right?
Sure.
Because okay, there's 8% of the population, 10% is diagnosed with ADHD, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
But just generally speaking, too, I think that, for a kid to just be on Instagram, scrolling, whether they have ADHD or not, that has to have an effect on their attention span, their reward systems in their brains, because these algorithms are tailor-made, right, to just give you that instant reward every 30 seconds. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
So, for me, when I see a lot of kids who do have ADHD, I know this is a general question. So I'll kind of try and cover both aspects. Social media plays a big role in terms of comorbidities, right? So, for example, when you have ADHD, it'll never, about 70 to 80% cases do have another challenge that comes up with ADHD. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be OCD, defiant behavior, etc. Right? Now, when you're on social media, you're firstly feeling incomplete, right? Somebody tells a 12, 13-year-old, hey, you've been diagnosed with ADHD, versus telling a 30-year-old you've been diagnosed with ADHD, right? They'll behave very differently. A 30-year-old will say, okay, thank God, I knew I wasn't this stupid throughout my life, right? Now I have an understanding, because a lot of people who I see, and me myself, right? I said, oh, you know what, I'm a dumb kid, maybe I was always so stupid, I'm not able to process this information, la la la. There's so many stories that go on in your head, and you're finally able to make sense of it and make peace with it. That's what it does to a adult. When you look at a 12, 13, 14-year-old, what happens when you're told you have ADHD? It's like, oh my God, I have a disorder. Yeah, and then to add to it, you're seeing these beautiful lives on social media, and you're seeing people in the everyone puts up their best lives, right? So you're constantly comparing yourself, which leads to other aspects. So with ADHD, another comorbidity definitely comes in, and these are some reasons. If we have to say social media is the reason, but even if you don't have ADHD, it's like nobody's putting up their worst life on social media. Everyone's putting their best life. So you're constantly comparing yourself. So yes, it is a challenge. It is
You're
definitely
comparing yourself to the best version of people's lives. And like you said, if you have ADHD, and that's very interesting because, like you said, it's a comorbid issue. So you have other things that come with it. You know, a lot of people.
You're more prone to it.
You're more
right?
prone to, like you said, depression or something like that. And I'm sure that has something to do with, the disconnect in your dopamine systems, or, effort reward, whatever that may be, like the neurochemistry behind it. So I mean, that makes sense intuitively that someone, with ADHD would be more likely to, like suffer from these other afflictions. But like you said, like, I think that with the right, I guess structure as a word is one way to put it, but I think it also has to do with discipline and like a little bit of impulse control, because how much can you really, hedge for discipline in somebody's life? So like, for example, you have clients, right? And you might tell them, you might advise them on, okay, you have to schedule your breaks. You spoke about scheduling breaks, and you schedule work from, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., whatever that may be. But at the end of the day, and the same thing applies for Instagram, like doom scrolling, to just turn the app off and go to bed. Like, how much of a role does discipline play in that? And how is acting on that discipline harder for someone with ADHD?
So the impulse is high, right? So it's extremely tough. Very, very, very tough, actually. Especially if you look at even adults, but even teenagers. But let's talk about adults. So there's this quote by Russell Barkley that says ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what you do. It's about doing what you know. So yes, definitely it's hard. It's harder for ADHD individuals with ADHD because they are not thinking clearly. You said structure and discipline. It's the same thing. If you have structure in your thoughts, in your emotions, in your actions, you have a structured life. So what individuals in these cases need to do is often externalize what they need to do. So what that means is, if I am constantly scrolling, or if you're constantly scrolling and you know you can't stop, you literally know you can't stop, you put this big, huge reminder right in front of your bed that says, Anas, stop scrolling, right? I need to stop scrolling for my work day tomorrow. I need to. So what is the reward that you're getting over there, right? You need people to remind you externally. And with younger kids, again, their parents can remind them. They can say, hey, don't do this multiple times. But as an adult, your mom's not walking into your room and saying, Anna, stop scrolling, go to sleep, man. It's on you. Right. So what do? You externalize accountability. You externalize reminders. And that sort of helps a lot. And then when you start seeing the reward only comes over time. Tomorrow, if you sleep at 11 p.m. today, and you've got your 6-7 hours or 8 hours of sleep, which is good for you, and next day you have a productive day at work. What is that? That's a reward for you. Then you do that again, and you do that again. Over time, it becomes easier for you, but you still need the reminders.
That's something very interesting, and I've noticed the benefits of this in my own life. You spoke about externalizing accountability.
Yeah.
Now I've realized, so I'm a Google Calendar user because I know that I need to do it. I need to use it. Before I used Google Calendar, I knew, okay, I have to wake up at this time, I need to go to the gym at this time. When I come back home at night, I need a routine at night as well. So I like to read a little bit, before I go to bed, do whatever it is that I need to do. Before I used Google Calendar, I knew that I had to do it. It's 10:30. It's not that I've forgotten, but I was just, for whatever reason, I wasn't being able to act on it. Like you said, it's about not doing what you know you're supposed to do. But after Google Calendar, because it sends you those reminders, I'd say if you have something scheduled for 10:30, at 10:20 it'll send you a reminder.
Absolutely,
that you need to do this. And just seeing that, that visual cue, it has an effect. I don't know what it is, but it has an effect. So I, like, as someone who's witnessed this in their own life, I can definitely attest to the importance of externalizing your accountability. I really like that word. I'm going to remember that.
I just want to clarify, when we say externalizing accountability, now look at it in a work perspective. Okay, so you're leading a team. You have to manage your schedule, you have to manage your team's schedules as well, right? Now, what do? You can't say, hey, I'm going to externalize accountability completely. So externalizing accountability doesn't mean that you depend on somebody. You take ownership of your job. So in your case, you've taken ownership of putting that reminder because you need it. And that's how you're externalizing your accountability as well. You're saying, hey, I'm accountable to myself. I'm not accountable to 20 people. Nobody's asking me. Right? So, especially as an adult, especially as a working professional, I think it's good to remember that you have to take ownership of your life. And with ADHD, you need to take more ownership of your life.
You just have to. It's just part and parcel.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it is a little harder. I won't lie. It definitely is a little harder, but it's not impossible. And sometimes I initially, when I just started practicing, I used to feel like, am I giving my clients tools which are life-changing? Because you asked me a question right now, it's harder, what do I do? And the answer is very simple. Use a Google Calendar. Put a big piece of paper in front of you. So they are not tools and techniques that are, absolutely unique and life-changing, but they can change your life. They're simple techniques that if you kind of practice on a daily basis, it becomes a habit, and that can be life-changing.
I think that's a very important point. And just to articulate it in a concise way, when it comes to ADHD, there's no silver bullet. You have to take accountability. You have to take ownership. Like you said, ownership is a word you've said a few times, and I get that. And you have to exercise discipline. Yes, it might be harder for you than it is for other people.
Yeah.
But that's just the cards you're dealt. So play the cards you're dealt like the cards you want. Right? It's a principle for life. But I agree with that.
And speaking of, you mentioned the word exercise, right? So exercise again is something that gives you a dopamine hit.
Dude, I just want to say to the people, we were talking about how we're gonna, bring it in. It's a great segue. Fantastic. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I'm a coach. I pick on words.
This is why you get paid the big bucks, guys. Ankita, for you. Please continue.
So exercise. There are a couple of things that actually help you increase your dopamine levels. Exercising for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it's the best way to do that. Eating the right food, like I shared right now. Don't look at the big, what is this big life-changing moment? Do these smaller things that change your life instead. So eating a high-protein breakfast, lunch, and then maybe having some carbs in your dinner, because you have to have a balanced diet at the end of the day. But reducing your sugar, not having, what do? We wake up as a society, we've been said, oh, you wake up, the first thing you do is have your tea and coffee, right? Is that good? If you have ADHD, or even otherwise, actually having a cup of coffee on an empty stomach, no, it's not good, because what's it going to do? It's like a Red Bull. It'll give you that high and then the crash. So lining your stomach, just eat a piece of toast. Simple as that, right? Then have your coffee. Small thing. High protein diet, exercising. And I say this to a lot of my clients. This is a tool that we use often. When you're procrastinating, I know it's very hard because you are procrastinating to actually do something, but somewhere have a chat with yourself loudly, not in your mind, but outside. Just be like, hey, let's say you're having a chat with yourself. Maybe it sounds like
No, I do it and I own it. I do it.
So why don't you tell me the chat that you have with yourself? And
one thing I say to myself often, I find myself saying this. I would say, when your life isn't going exactly the way you want, you're a little behind on your tasks. I'll look at myself, I'll be like, get your shit together too. I say it.
That works for you.
And I say it out loud, and
love it.
And I say other things as well, like a little harsher. Like I'm very hard on myself, but it works for me. I need the tough love. That's just how I am. But I completely agree. You have to vocalize it because it's something about putting that out into the world rather than just in here, externalizing accountability, right? So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing, right? If you're sitting on your bed binge watching something, you know that you should be hitting the gym right now. Just be like, hey, whatever your name is. So I would be like, hey, Ankita, listen, I know I'm feeling really lazy right now, but will I regret not going to the gym? Will I feel better actually? Tell me how you're going to feel. Are you going to feel better if you go to the gym? Yeah, maybe let me do one thing. Maybe let me just get up and get ready and wear my workout clothes. Yeah, or let me just do 5 burpees, or just do 5 push-ups. Let's see how I feel and take it from there. That helps increase your dopamine, so you can actually think clearly in terms of what you really need. What do you choose? It's not what you need. Also, what do you choose to do that you're not going to regret?
It's like the hardest thing is breaking through that inertia, right, in the beginning. And once you're through that, once you do 5 burpees, the next 15 are way easier to do.
Absolutely.
But you spoke about, before we move on to the next thing, you spoke about, and I think this is so important because again, I've suffered from this as a result of this in my life, is the importance of diet. There was a study, again, I had to do a lot of research because I wanted to be well prepared for our episode, by Bohr et al. And he talks about how obviously a diet high in sugar, a diet high in processed foods, which we are moving towards more and more, in this modern world that we live in, is directly related to worsening ADHD symptoms. And you spoke about, a high protein diet and how that's important. So what would you say, for example, most people, I think, like, eat breakfast before going to office or before going to school. So what do you recommend that, people eat, both for vegetarian, non-vegetarian clients? I'm sure you have both. So what do you normally suggest?
I would say just even having some nuts in the morning, or if you can do some sort of cereal, or a quick sandwich maybe. If it's a protein heavy sandwich, I know we're adding carbs to that, but I think that would be helpful. But nuts is very good, right? If you're feeling a little low on energy, just have that. That's super, super helpful, I feel. Actually, more than me being really an expert in the nutrition you should eat, I think where my expertise here would come in would be in terms of binge eating is another comorbidity of ADHD, right?
Comes back to impulse control, right?
Comes back to that. So when you eat something, or often when you're bored, and I think our friend here spoke about it.
I can't see him, but I can feel him smiling in shame.
Our friend here spoke about this earlier, before we started, saying that, I will walk out and eat something even just because I'm bored. I don't even want to eat it, but I'll just go and eat. What does that do? It gives you some sort of, hey, you're making a decision to do something, yeah? And this becomes very common. When you're bored, you tend to eat a lot. And when you eat the wrong things, then, it gives you that high and then that crash very quickly.
On this point, there's this fantastic book called Atomic Habits. It's a very famous book. A lot of people, it's one of those mainstream books. A lot of people have read it.
And fantastic
book. Now, there's this principle that I came across in it that absolutely was game-changing for me. And he basically talked about how the anticipation of pleasure gives you a higher, like, dopamine, serotonin boost than pleasure itself.
Correct.
So, for example, like, the anticipation for people that smoke of smoking a cigarette is peaks right before you smoke that cigarette, if I have that correctly, and it actually goes down after that cigarette is smoked. So I think, the same thing can apply to binge eating, for example. The anticipation of that food and that little, that sugar rush is higher than, is is more pleasing to the brain than the actual, effects of eating that sugar.
So it's connected. I would not say uh, it's 100% when it comes to ADHD, and I'll tell you why. Because there's this phenomenon called temporal discounting. What that means, and that's a part of ADHD. What that means is that an individual who has ADHD is not able to think about past or future. They are able to think about now. So currently, if they eat that, they get an instant gratification or instant reward. So I don't know in this case if it would be before, but it definitely will be at that moment, right? It will give you a dopamine hit because they are unable to look into the future.
And I think a lot of people, even with ADHD, might honestly fight back on that. Like, I'm not this person that can't, control impulses, because nobody wants to perceive themselves in that way. But I think actually the first step is recognizing that, okay, I do struggle with this. And given that I struggle with this, acceptance is the first step, right? You have to accept the fact that, yes, this is an issue for me. Not being able to, accurately calculate repercussions or go back into the past, like you said. But how do you, with your own patients, how do you cope with, or how do you help them cope with recognizing that, yes, there is an impediment to my life, while helping them avoid like the internal stigma that might come with it?
So, very interesting question. Now, there are 3 steps that I follow in any session, okay? And this is, of course, not going to be said out loud to the client, but it's at the back of my mind. It's awareness, acceptance, and action. Like you very rightly said, acceptance is a big one, right? Now, when we are in conversation, sometimes it may look like what you've come to me for is not the cause. So, for example, someone comes to me for, hey, I'm not very productive at work. Yeah. I want to increase my productivity. For them, it's not actually about increasing productivity, it's about maybe I'm not making decisions at work, I don't have that much freedom at work, maybe it's not a creative enough job for me, correct? It could be different things. So, through my sessions, what I partner with the client to explore what could be the potential reasons, right? So, to give you an instance, um, I was seeing a client and they were telling me about their routine not being in place. And every time they break their routine, they tend to engage in different aspects like binge eating or just kind of going into a total down phase, etc. And they didn't use the word binge eating. They just said, yeah, what do? I do A, B, C, D, and eating was one of the aspects. And over time, when we spoke about it, now one, we have to speak about it very comfortably, right? I can't say, hey, do you binge eat? And they'll be like very defensive, what's going on? But it's more having a conversation and exploring. And when you explore different aspects, then they perhaps will understand, one, there's no shame or guilt that you need to feel while you're here. And only if you're aware and accept that something is going on, only then can you move forward. So yes, there are clients who come who are willing to take that exploration path and they are able to accept. There are also clients who don't want to accept, and in that case, well, it is what it is.
So, Ankita, your expertise is treating adults that have been diagnosed with ADHD and giving them the right tools, and helping them mitigate their problems, the challenges that they might face. But before that, like we spoke about, there has to be a recognition and an acceptance. So, in terms of recognition, can you talk about some of the effects that untreated ADHD has on an adult's life, in terms of their personal life? We'll hit all three: personal, professional, and we can go on from there, and sexual. But let's start with the personal.
So, what happens is when you have ADHD, like we've spoken multiple times now, you're hyperactive, you're inattentive, the way you make decisions will be very impulsive. Sometimes maybe you're extremely quiet and don't have a sense of belonging. Maybe you're feeling depressed, anxious, anything. when you're not diagnosed, you don't really know where this is coming from. I mean, think about it. Those when you're younger, your younger days shape your adulthood also to an extent, right? To a large extent. So if you're constantly getting those can do better report cards and nobody's really giving you the right tools to work with it, and you're constantly thinking, hey, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, it shapes who you become as an adult. So you do tend to have confidence issues, you do tend to have self-esteem issues, and I do think that you may also become a little defensive when you grow up, right? When somebody's telling you, because all throughout your life you've only heard of, you're not doing this, you're not good at this, you don't know this, da da da. So you don't have any, you don't know the why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I unable to manage my impulses? Why am I leaving a meeting constantly? Why am I constantly switching jobs? I don't know. So I think that's the biggest challenge when it comes to untreated, undiagnosed ADHD.
Then it can lead to, like you said, not knowing and being ignorant to the cause of your problems can only worsen, for people that are anywhere more likely to you know be like you said, comorbid disease, right? So be depressed and be anxious can only worsen those symptoms. Because like you said, like if you're a kid, and the same thing applies to an adult, can do better, you don't know how can I do better. That causes, I can totally imagine in the mind of someone that frustration that they might feel. So it makes sense, and the literature obviously supports it, because I came across another studies. I've come across so many studies in preparing for you.
I love that you remember all these names.
Yeah. No,
Fantastic.
no, I don't remember these names. I've put them down on my laptop.
But
so
that's super.
yeah, that's me dealing with my own ADHD. Like you need a plan.
Totally.
But there was a study by Abel et al. That basically said the same thing. A higher likelihood of depression, drinking problems, and interpersonal relations. So it makes sense again intuitively. But I think that being untreated would only make these things worse. Now, in terms of professional life, someone with ADHD, how do they actually, you know what? Let me take a step back, because we spoke about this before the cameras were rolling. In your personal life, you're an adult with ADHD. How much of an effect and what can the people around you do to, help you overcome and mitigate those symptoms?
So, if you are diagnosed with ADHD, socialization is a big challenge, right? When you speak about what people can do around you, let me give you an example. A friend of, very close friend of mine, was diagnosed with ADHD at a very young age. So every time he came for a group dinner, group party, whatever it was, he would always leave early. And for the longest time, till we didn't know he had ADHD, we would constantly question him and be like, hey, why are you leaving early? Why do you always do this? Right? You're in college, you're young, you don't really give your friends that space that you may do today. So and you want to be there for them. So you're concerned and like, why are you going, etc. etc. But when you are diagnosed and when people around you know, your support system changes, because now they understand and you have to be a big part of their understanding. You have to educate them in some way to say, listen, with my ADHD comes, I face challenges with socialization. So after an hour or two, I just feel really drained. I need to go home. No questions asked. Great. In calling say you're going to a party or a function, you call the host beforehand and say, listen, I'm going to leave at a certain point. Please excuse me. I won't come and say bye to you, but I'm going to head out. It's a great way to do that. What you're doing is you're maintaining respect, and at the same time, nobody's going to put that pressure on you at that moment, right? A big thing with ADHD is impulsivity. So, with a lot of young adults, what tends to happen is they tend to go drinking. There's a lot of drinks, drugs, sex involved over there. At that point, letting your friends know that, listen, I am drinking, but I need you to take me home, right? So that sexuality aspect sort of is taken care of. You're safe. once you inform your friends. You know that you're not, you're going to go back to your house, but you have to give them that information, because as we grow older, I think individuals also start creating respectful boundaries. Hey, I don't want to interfere too much in your life. I mean, if you want to have fun and perhaps go, meet somebody and go out on a date and go to their place, etc., etc., it's totally fine if you want to do that. But if you're forthcoming to say, listen, it's my ADHD, it's my impulsivity that comes in the way and I regret it the next day, then of course they can help you with it, right?
It's interesting. You brought up you brought up the example of drinking and, impulse control and sexuality. There was very interesting literature around it. And I think it's different for men and women. There was a study that I came across that spoke about women and their struggles with impulsivity and how it affects their, the sexual aspect of their life. And it basically said that, for, I guess, for the lack of a better word, women suffer the brunt or bear the brunt of it to a higher extent, because the repercussions of impulsive sexual behavior, not just socially but also biologically, are greater for women.
Absolutely.
So, it spoke about how, again, like having ADHD and being a woman, that's an extra, I guess, mountain that you have to climb, because, like I said, like you have a greater, like the repercussions are just a little more serious than they are for men.
Yeah.
And you brought up a good point, and I've had this in my own life with my friends. I have someone in my life who suffers severely from ADHD and who struggles with their impulse control. And when we go out, we haven't had this conversation explicitly, but just because we're his friends and we know that, this person does struggle with, maybe not stopping at the appropriate amount of drinks. His friends around him have, now helped him be like, listen, like you got to chill, because as much as he might want to, he struggles with that, with just putting a stop to it.
Correct.
So the importance of having the right socialization,
100%.
the right like support system around you for those people is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Even for example, individuals who have ADHD may be very more sensitive to sound, right? So when you're being careful about when you're going to a restaurant, not choosing a very loud place, or if you're selecting a table, not sitting right under the speaker, because that may actually bother them a little more. So I think it's important, while an individual needs to share these details and educate, like I said earlier, their close ones about this. I think over time it's also nice to kind of understand the person like you do, like you understand your friend, and like you said, they've not said it, so it's sort of a norm, right? It's an unsaid rule, and you do things for them. So I think, yeah, that two-way, now that the awareness is there, that two-way interaction, understanding is very important.
And on the other side of it, with men that have been diagnosed with ADHD have, or well, suffer with, at a higher rate, sexual dysfunction than the general population. Now, obviously, I know you're not a psychiatrist, but you are an expert on the subject. So, is there like some light that you can shed on that subject?
Honestly, I'm not when it comes to this, yes, that impulsivity happens. I've read a lot about this in terms of, for them, the impulse. So maybe they engage in sexual activities which get over very quickly. So all of those things do happen. And I've read a lot on that aspect, but I guess that's about it from my side when it comes to this.
And intuitively speaking, also, I think because people with ADHD suffer with paying attention, and I think that can, in other words, being present.
Yeah.
And I think that difficulty in being present, I think, might translate to like issues when it comes to in the bedroom, because so much of that sexual world is about being present and being in the moment.
Sure.
And if you have ADHD, then you struggle with that. So I think intuitively that's how I make sense of it. But I'm sure there's a plethora of other of other reasons.
No, 100%, and you're right. It does make sense of it. I've not dealt with anyone directly when it comes to, intimacy issues. But yes, the inattention, the hyperactivity, right, finishing too quickly or not being able to focus or be there at the moment is a challenge. But to kind of take that a step ahead, to just talk about relationships, right, for a moment. When you do have ADHD, your partner needs to understand, have the right information to deal with you. And you also need to be conscious of their needs. It's not just one way where somebody has to understand you because, hey, you have ADHD. You can't blame ADHD for everything. At some point, you have to, that's why we say you have to take charge and take control of your life and manage it and cope with it. There are a lot of challenges that I see with individuals having good or long lasting relationships, because they tend to blame other people a lot for how they feel because they are unable to make sense of it. um, think of it in a husband wife relationship, right? Your partner may expect you to do certain chores in the house, but if you have ADHD, you may forget to do it doing it, right? So what is the structure that you set for your relationship? Does your partner remind you once, twice? Do you put your own post-its everywhere? Hey, this is what I need to get done. Does your partner leave post-its for you? It can't be, these are daily tasks that really come in the way. They might seem really small, but think about it in this way. If your partner's job, who has ADHD, is to put on the washing machine every day, very small thing, and no big deal if it's not done once. But imagine if they forget to do it for 7 days. What happens? The laundry piles up. Is it a big deal? Yes, eventually, if you don't have clean clothes, it is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Right? And it may not be a big deal in 2 days, but in 7 days it is. And that leads to bigger fights and bigger challenges. And hey, you don't understand me, and you're not doing this, you're not helping me, etc. So I think setting a structure in a relationship of what I need versus what I can give becomes very important.
And also, that's where communication comes in, right?
Absolutely. And even with your family members, even with your parents, with your friends around, because there's so many people I see where they will say, hey, you know what, I'm not in touch with my friends. But listen, if you share what you're going through, they perhaps will not expect you to text them every week or every 3 days or every 4 days. They will understand that, hey, they can reach out to you, or whenever you do think of them, you'll reach out to them, right? So yes.
So you spoke about two, I think, big, but distinct subjects. ADHD and relationships, and ADHD and intimate relationships and familial relationships. So as a therapist, not therapist, but as an
Coach.
as a coach, as an expert in the subject, what would be your advice in terms of specific actionables for someone dealing with ADHD in terms of how they should conduct themselves in an intimate, relationship, and to their partner as well?
So when it comes to an intimate relationship or a regular relationship, I think communication, you brought that word up. Communication is very important. Education is very important for the other person, right? And that's almost everything. Also, check-ins or follow-ups. This may sound like a very corporate word. Why do I need to follow up with my partner, right? But constantly sitting together, say once a week even, or twice in the week for 5 minutes and chatting and saying, okay, how are you doing? Are we doing okay on the house chores? Are we doing okay in our intimate relationship? What is it that we together need to work on, right? Also understanding, and this is important for both people in a relationship, intimate or otherwise, not to get defensive, not to start a screaming match, because that's not helping anybody or anything. If somebody says something to you, accept that it's not coming as a bullet to you. It's coming because somebody wants to work on improving this life with you, again, as a partner or family, or in any improving the relationship that they have with you. So not being defensive, also knowing then how to communicate whether you have ADHD or not. If I tell you, as a friend, Anas, why did you not show up? Right? Versus, are you okay? I didn't see you there that day. It's a very different conversation. So I think being conscious about how you communicate. Again, this is not just with ADHD, but just generally knowing what to say and how to say it. Don't be, why is a very, why did you do this? It comes across as very aggressive versus how are you doing about it? So I think keeping that in mind is important.
And I would assume that, as a coach, coaching people in terms of their communication is probably a big part of what you do. Because, I think at the end of the day, there's so many issues. Like you said, whether it's an intimate relationship, whether it's a family relationship, the the basic problems might, be the same. And I think the solution for a lot of them is communication, and not just for ADHD, just generally to live, like a happy life and have, fulfilling relationships.
Yeah.
It's so very important. And while we're on this subject of coaching, I wanted to talk to you about your own clients and some of the some examples that, if you can give us,
Yeah.
Share them with us, while respecting obviously their confidentiality.
Of course.
So I want to take it in. I want to divide that into
Okay.
in two avenues. The first is with individual clients,
Okay.
and the second is with your corporate clients. So in terms of individual clients, are there any let's say patterns? Have you recognized any patterns between and some of it will be repetitive because we've spoken about it already, but talk about the patterns that your clients, that you normally see in terms of their issues, and the advice, the advice that you tend to give to most people, and it might apply not just to them but to listeners, as in general.
I think fantastic question, Anas, and I think that's why we're doing this, right? So people understand how to work with their ADHD better. What are certain things that you can apply? Because you can be a thinker, but you also need to be a doer. There has to be a right balance between the two. So in terms of ADHD patterns specifically, I see a lot of time blindness, which means unable to look into the future. Temporal discounting, which I spoke about earlier, which is again not looking at what is rewarding right now, right? Another thing that I see often is that a lot of clients are okay for a week, 10 days, they're following their routines, they're following their schedules. But one small change in their schedule can really abruptly change everything. So being also accepting somewhere that things are, while you have a routine, while you have a structure, life will, give you things which are not a part of your plan. And you have to be somewhere okay and train yourself at that moment to take a pause and deal with what's there at that moment, rather than totally saying I can't do this, right? So yes, very important to have a structure and schedule everything and be disciplined, but there will be times where things don't go exactly to the T, knowing that's not in your control. You can only take ownership of your life, of your half of your life, of your part. You, what's not in your control is not in your control. Being okay with that uncertainty. Do you have a question?
I was gonna ask you to now talk about your corporate clients. In terms of, well, when you say corporate clients, do you also coach like corporations or individuals within the corporation? Is it more one or the other, or is it both?
So it's both, but I do a lot of work in terms of leadership coaching with my corporate clients, especially because right now there's still a lot more awareness that needs to come in, for there to, for a corporate to hire somebody who's going to talk about ADHD very specifically, because in India there's still many people who are undiagnosed, right? So the work that I do with them is a lot on awareness on sexual harassment, um, being a big one, and also leadership skills, building a leadership mindset, being resilient, things like that.
And in terms of individuals within
Yeah.
corporations, you probably who do have it. These are your ADHD clients, I'm assuming.
So corporates are more life coaching and leadership
More life
coaching.
coaching, and like you said,
Yeah.
sexual harassment and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
We could get into it, but we spoke about
Yeah.
it earlier because we've already been. I think how long have we been recording for?
20 minutes and plus 45 minutes.
Okay, so over an hour already.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I figured I had originally planned
Huh.
a structure for us to go over all of these
Huh.
things, but I don't think it'll
Don't
be
worry
possible
about
to
it.
cover
No, don't.
in one pod
Yeah.
because if and when we do hit it, maybe we can have another pod going, like down the line. I want to hit it with the time and attention that it deserves. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you if you have any final thoughts, or if there's something that I've missed that you might want to discuss.
Can I give a few like real tools that they can use?
Yes, of
May
course,
I?
of course.
Yes,
please.
I won't take too much of
Do
your
it,
time.
do it. No, you can take as much time as you need.
But there are some really interesting, very simple tools like your notes on your phone, right? Very important to note things down. So often when you're, say, in the middle of work, you may think of a personal chore that you need to do. Or when you're out driving, you're somewhere out, you think of work. Use Alexa and Siri. Use them. Just be like, hey, can you remind me of this tomorrow at 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. or whatever time it is, right? So we've got all these tools in our hand. It's just about using them. There are a lot of great features today on our laptops and phones. So you can set downtime, which means your screen totally blanks out for those the time that you set, etc. I think that's very important. Plus, another interesting thing on the iPhone, especially, is setting reminders. So if you go into settings under downtime, there is this bit which talks about, I can't remember the exact name, but it basically says remind me after 5 minutes or 10 minutes that I've been on Instagram. Basically give me a notification that it's been 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So again, it's a great reminder to have. So I think just using these tools in our day-to-day life really can change and be life-changing.
Yeah, and
so I would suggest.
It's like you said, these incremental changes over time. You used it with the laundry in a negative context, but I think, like you said, these incremental changes in a positive context can compound.
Absolutely.
And in a week, in a year, in 10 years, you're living a different life.
Yeah.
And dude, I'm sure that like the clients that you're working with, are actively experiencing these changes. I have when I worked with professionals in my life with my ADHD, and it is like you said, you can never cure it, but you can mitigate it and overcome the majority of the repercussions of it. And yeah, man, like I think the only hope is that if there's even whoever listening, if they can take a couple lessons from like the last hour and 10 hour and 20 minutes that you've spoken, I think we've done our job.
Absolutely.
And I also want to say, before one of my favorite parts is about hosting a podcast is the preparation to it, and the collaborative nature of getting to this day. So most of the work happens, it's Friday at 6:30 we start shooting, but most of our conversations actually happen before it, right? Like coming up with what should we talk about, and it was really fun. I learned a lot in preparing for this pod, but I also learned a good few things, while you were talking, and I made a lot of mental notes. Luckily, I've got the cameras to remind me of them when I go back. So thank you for that. I could also sense while we were talking that Abrar was really enjoying it. I'm sure that he's gonna hit you up, once we're through. But yeah, dude, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the knowledge that you've imparted on us, on everyone listening. And yeah, man, thank you so much.
But thank you so much for having me, Anas.
Yeah.
I think you'd put in so much effort into this. And before we close, I just want to say one thing.
Please.
Don't look at ADHD as your own. I don't mean this to you, but to everybody listening, don't make it your identity. It's not. It's a part of you. It's essentially, one slice of those 8 slices in a pizza. So it's one part, one really small part. So work with it like you probably work with other challenges in your life. So it's not you, it's just a part of you. So thank you very much, and thanks for all the research that you've done and shared. Really had a great time.
I'm glad you enjoyed. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. Awesome, guys. That was
And thank you
fantastic.
guys. Thank you very, very much.